Novak, and this is the second episode of the Analysts with Jake Novak, and they said it wouldn't last. This is our second episode, and we had a lot of topics that we hit in week one of the Analysts, but I have to say, since we taped that first episode, we have had even more very historic events happen, not only for what goes on in the campaign, in this presidential campaign and some of the other campaigns down ticket, but just simply in the news cycle. I would say the number one event that we had is something that you should understand is very unusual, even though you may think this is a logical thing that happens. You had a sitting president of the United States announce a major foreign policy change, not just for his administration, but for decades and generations of American policy. And everybody took it for granted, whether they were on the right or the left, pro-Joe Biden, the president, anti-Joe Biden. Everyone took it for granted that this was a move that he was making because of the presidential election for his campaign. That's not really normal, folks. I know you may think, if you're cynical, you think every decision is always about elections, and you may be right sometimes, but it's not exactly something that you see a lot in American history, where everyone sees a big foreign policy move and immediately starts analyzing it based on how it will affect or not affect the election. Now, of course, this was happening already on the basis of something that is also incredibly unusual. You have a major presidential candidate, a nominee, a presumptive nominee of one of the major parties, a former president who is still on trial, literally on trial, going to a courtroom Monday through Friday. Again, that is extremely unusual, whether you think the trial is a sham or not, whether you think it's been fair or not. It's extremely unusual. And of course, it's playing a role in this election. No one can deny that. And finally, you had a third thing that's going on that I think is, again, we shouldn't take for granted that it's normal just because it's been going on for 9 years. And that is, you've had a presidential candidate, the same presidential candidate in Donald Trump, who's been in court Monday through Friday, drawing massive crowds to his rallies. Now, again, we're used to this with Donald Trump, but understand this just doesn't happen. In the course of American history, you've had some massive rallies in presidential elections. They usually happen a day or two before the general election. That's when those things happen. They don't necessarily happen very much during the primary season, which we're still in. We haven't had our conventions yet. They don't necessarily happen very often, more than once or twice. You had somebody like Barack Obama getting a massive rally or two around the time of the 2008 election, but that wasn't normal. Folks, we have a lot of unusual things going on in this campaign, things that we shouldn't take for granted, but they need to be analyzed for what they are so we can judge them on their merits, how they help or don't help this election season. So without further ado, I want to bring in my first guest, because my first guest is someone who understands a lot of this history. And I'm trying to think of the best way to introduce Jeff Ballabon. He's our first guest. I think the best way to introduce him would be Jeff, in every way, is basically a better version of me. He has a better Ivy League degree than I do. He's had some very more impressive jobs in the news media than I've had. He's had impressive jobs in the government more than I've had. He's written a lot of amazing stuff, and it's just really my honor. And most importantly, he's a better Torah scholar than I am, but also he gets to visit Israel a lot more than I do. And he is joining us now from Israel, live from Israel. So first of all, just thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us. And my first question to Jeff has to be, what's the mood over there in Israel right now, obviously 6 months into this war with Hamas?
It's a great question, Jake. First of all, thanks for the very lovely introduction. And yeah, I mean, I wish I could disagree, but thanks for the very lovely introduction. Very nice of you to say. Very happy to be here. And I know this is a pretty new project for you, so I want to wish you great good fortune with this project. You may say that, but I know that you know that I've come to you many times for your guidance and advice on these matters, and I admire and look up to you as well in these areas. And I know that we're like-minded, but also with enough differences in experience to make it interesting. So mood. Well, I'm right now a little bit buoyant because we're at the end of Independence Day, but Independence Day comes hard on the heels of Memorial Day. And so it's an extreme roller coaster every year of an experience here in Israel. Memorial Day, just to give an image, Memorial Day to an American audience, having grown up in America, Memorial Day, listen, is barbecues, which are great. That's Independence Day here. Memorial Day here is not something that happened to somebody else or something that happened a generation ago. It is always imminent to every family every year. And more than that, it's a very small society and everybody feels very close to one another. And so the airwaves are filled with the stories of the lost from the year. This year, of course, there were more lost than any year until now. And it was just impossible to cover everybody. Speakers and television programs that had in past years gone over every single person killed that year couldn't do it this year. And they said they couldn't do it this year. And obviously what happened this year wasn't just in terms of quantity, but in terms of quality in every way. What happened on October 7th was a shock to the system, and it's a shock that's ongoing. I mean, let's remember there's still hostages. The country is riven with angst and pain over the fate of hostages still not found. I discovered literally last night that just a relatively new friend that I made about a year ago here, who's been strangely silent over the last few months. It turns out that the son that he thought was missing, he then found out shortly afterwards was injured. We found out afterwards was killed, and the body is being held in Gaza, and they can't even get the body back. And is living. This people just living with. Everybody knows somebody directly who's living with ongoing pain, or everyone is experiencing pain, and it's an entire country in trauma. That said, the spirit here, I grew up at a time, Jake, I'm sure you did also, in a place where no matter what else was going on, there was just a baseline reality that you felt pride and a privilege of being an American. It was just the greatest thing. You would never want to have been born anywhere else. And you just felt pretty darn good. You didn't earn it, but you felt pretty darn good about being born an American, and felt a little bad for everybody who wasn't. Well, let me tell you something. It's dwarfed. First of all, Americans by and large don't feel that way anymore. And that's a tragedy. And it would be great I think would solve a lot of America's problems. It would be changed. It's one of the observations I have spending so much time here. I'm splitting my time. I'll just give you an example, and this has been happening consistently, but last night, as we shifted from Memorial Day to Independence Day, it completely blew up. Israelis of all ages, of all colors, of all looks, of all religious outlooks, from the most secular to the most religious, there's like an almost new national anthem, which I'm sure you've heard, Am Yisrael Chai, which the people of Israel live, the nation of Israel lives. And among the words are, God watches over us, and no one could ever beat us because we're not worried about it as long as we're united. And when this song comes on, it's very upbeat. No matter where people are, they just jump up and point at the skies, point at heaven, and start singing together. Last night it was singing and dancing together in the restaurants, in the streets, and a sense of unity and love, but more than that, a sense of pride. And it's in the middle of a difficult time. It's not just a reaction to wanting to not see the bad stuff. They're very realistic. And that's the other reality, which is every single person you see in the street, right? The parking attendant, the doctor, the accountant, the shopkeeper, not every, but the vast majority of them, they're spending a lot of their time also as combat soldiers. I posted a little while ago on Twitter, there was a waitress, she's 24 years old, and she comments to me, I'm 24, this is my fourth war. She doesn't mean the fourth war she's lived through, the fourth war she's been in combat in, right? And she says, and she's, up north, and it's actually more frightening up north, which you don't even hear about, than Gaza. The last 3 wars she was in Gaza. Why? I asked her, because in Gaza, or outside Gaza, in Gaza, there's all kinds of places to hide behind. Up north, you're facing Hezbollah, open fields, and there's literally nowhere to hide. And so you're being rocketed, and no one's even reporting this ongoing war because it's a much lower level war, but there's rockets and RPGs and missiles, and they're exploding, and there's nowhere to hide. So the soldiers have to just drop to the ground and hope that they don't get blown away by shrapnel. And simultaneously, we have about 80,000 Israelis, which is a large number for a small community, who since October 7th have had to live elsewhere. They've been living all throughout the country, and that's from the north. They're already back in their homes in the south, the ones that weren't destroyed. So it's a very complicated emotional time here, but the unity is unbelievable. The optimism is unbelievable. The confusion, and by the way, the fear for world Jewry is very severe here. They were talking about it throughout Memorial Day as well. And so it's a very intense mood here, but I have to say it's a period of people feel blessed to be united, and it's very powerful that way.
Well, let's get right into that, because I think the first thing I want to talk about is President Biden's incredible interview, not in a good way, but incredible because it was in many ways hard to believe, with Erin Burnett on CNN last week, where he basically changed American policy right on the spot there, saying that he was going, first of all, saying two major statements on the Middle East there. First, saying that Israel's not doing enough and is not taking care to protect civilian lives, which is the polar opposite of the truth. There are Israelis who get wounded and killed because of that caution. Obviously, Israel could carpet bomb Gaza at any time, so that's just a lie on its face. But more importantly, he talked about how he was going to withhold some weapons from Israel if they go, quote unquote, if they go into Rafah. And everyone, as I said in the preamble, everyone, right, left, doesn't matter, support Biden, I guess, everyone took this for granted, that this was a statement he was making for the campaign. In other words, a political statement, even though officially foreign policy is not supposed to be guided by that. We understand, no one who isn't even a little bit cynical, we all know that's not completely true, but this was certainly true in this case. So the first question I want to ask you, though, let's get down to brass tacks and what the point of this show is. The two of us could argue about the positives and negatives and the tremendous negatives for the American Jewish community for what Biden said. But let's talk about the election. Is abandoning Israel and basically putting the American Jewish community in danger, I think, from the anti-Semitic mobs, is this actually, should we be cynical here and say, well, it's a terrible thing, but this helps them in the polls? Does it really do that?
It doesn't do that, but the Democrats have never learned that feeding the monster just makes the monster more voracious on any progressive front. So, the thing about the far left, or the thing about those who just want power, is that, I'll give you an example. There's a video, a gotcha video. Hey, look, Joe Biden was, against gay marriage, and now he's for it. Or Dick Durbin was against abortion, and now he's for it. It's like, guys, the left doesn't want your purity of belief. The left doesn't want you to believe what they believe. Actually, that's not power. You know what power is? Power is getting you to mouth the lie that everyone knows is a lie. That's power. Right? To get you to bow to the idol that we all know is sticks and stones. To say the emperor has no clothes. That's actually what power is. And by the way, America has fallen under the thrall of this kind of power for a very long time. So, number one, I agree with where I think you're going with this, Jake, that there may be some elements of people arguing this is good for Michigan and Minnesota, and I've been guilty of making the same argument myself, but only as a narrow issue, meaning there may be some people making the case. And also to say that it's scandalous for American media to make that case unabashedly and uncritically. See, that's where that argument bothers me. If you believe that, then how do you just say that without saying, and that's outrageous? Okay. But more deeply, if you look at the Democrats' platform from 2020, there's two things. Personnel is policy. We should talk about that. We should pin that, which is the people advising them, including on what you were talking about with Erin Burnett, the people advising them that Israel's waging of war might be questionable are people who just look at their social media. We see who they are. They support Hamas. They literally call for river to the sea. They're the ones who are literally on record as being the ones advising the State Department about this issue. So personnel is policy. That's number one. But number two is that this actually is not good for Biden politically. In other words, really, and I wish that the Israelis understood this better, and the kind of conversations they have with them, which is Israel is a lot more popular in America than Joe Biden or the Democratic Party. And the truth of it is, even though there are a lot of people who hate Israel, there are a lot of very quiet people who also hate the idea of sexualizing kids in preschool, and drag queen story hour also in preschool, but in elementary school. And there are a lot of people who don't like it, but that doesn't mean you hear them rising up and screaming. You just see that in the poll after poll, 75-80% say, yeah, that's not for us. I kind of feel that's where Israel is for most Americans, which is, it's not my direct issue, but yeah, siding with the genocidal, rapist, terrorist murders of October 7th, not really for us. And they're just not loud about it. And so honestly, the problem is that Israel has always felt the need to diplomatically say, yeah, whoever's in the White House is our best friend. Whether even when it was Obama, who was miserable for Israel, and when it's Biden, who's been miserable for Israel for 50 plus years in Washington. But if you look at the Democrats' platform in 2020, they told you every single specific that we're seeing now. They told you they were going to support Iran, give Iran nukes while claiming they weren't. Everything is double talk. And it was immediately greeted with cheers by the Iranian proxies in America, okay? Of course, we're pro-Israel, says the platform, but on condition. What's the condition? That these murderers, terrorists, rapists, savages who committed October 7th, they get to have the entire Israeli Jewish heartland, the indigenous heartland and the highland of Judea and Samaria to have a state, okay? Where the Palestinian state used to be an Israeli contingency, maybe we can negotiate for peace in exchange for our heritage and our homeland and our high ground and our strategic depth. Now it's no. It's a suffrage issue and it's a must issue. So they become every part of this and criminalizing, I'll end with this, criminalizing Jews for just living in Judea. That's literally part of the Democrat agenda. Meaning, imagine this. The Democrats went nuts about what they called the Muslim ban, which did not ban any Muslims from living anywhere in the world, but they called it a Muslim ban and went nuts. The same week they passed their anti-Muslim ban law, or whatever it was, resolution, they also brought out the Democratic platform, which has an honest to God, genuine Jew ban. It says that, not directly, you have to parse it out, but it basically says that Jews who live in Judea and Samaria are criminals. Meaning, America has, the Democrats have as a policy, and now America does, that a specific people should not be allowed to live somewhere because of their ethnicity / nationality. It's shocking, and the only people they do that is Jews, and what you're seeing now is Biden living up to the exact strategy of the Democrats' platform in 2020.
Obviously they telegraphed this, and I think you saw it also in the 2012 convention, if you remember, when they booed Jerusalem. I mean, just the mention of Jerusalem at the Democrat convention. But I think that, listen, they've won some elections since then. Obviously, they haven't lost a popular vote in a long time. But I do think this has led to the delusion, and they're not looking at really the polls. When you take a look at Joe Biden's weakness in the American demographic, it's the moderate Democrats where he's weak. It's not these far leftists who you would think you could placate with a more anti-Israel policy. It's the John Fettermans of the world who he's really losing his traction with. And it's probably not necessarily, like you said, it's probably not Israel as their number one issue. But when it comes to Israel, they are supportive of Israel. They're going to be more likely to be very horrified by any kind of support for Hamas. And, my last question to you is there anything Joe Biden can say now after last week to bring that group back under his tent when it comes to Middle East policy?
Sure, there are things he could say, but that he won't say. He could say, you know what? We were wrong, because politicians don't do that. But to do this, Americans would actually love that, to say, you know what, we were getting advised by people, and here's why we trusted them, but they had an agenda, and that agenda was hostile to us. But the problem is that it's actually not just a Jewish problem or an Israel problem, it's an America problem. Because let me tell you what the biggest, if Trump really wanted to just sew this thing up, and it may never need to do this anymore, we don't have a border, which means that America has, we know this already, we just don't know the scope and scale. America has a bigger jihadi problem than Israel has, just in every respect, in terms of numbers, in terms of how far they've gotten in our country and how they're embedded in our country. And yet we have no plans for that and how to deal with that. The first one to say, and the evidence is vast, the first one to say, we've realized we have a problem here in this country, we're gonna have to deal with it, I think would basically win an election. What I was trying to say before is, if Israel understood that the time it's called Joe Biden quietly, if Bibi had called him up and said, you know what, Joe, frankly, we'd like to be your friend, you're making it a little difficult for us, and we can't keep on saying you're our friend anymore. And your people don't want to hear that. So we will say you're our friend, but you got to cut this out. That might have an impact, but it's very hard for Israel to say that to America. It just always has been. But I wish they understood that this administration is so far off base, not just the Republicans, obviously, but of independents, swing voters, and a lot of what had been their base until very recently, basically disgusted by them. And this is just, along a plane of what I would think of as social, cultural, moral issues where the Overton window has lurched so far left. Again, it's whether it's sexualizing little children or it's supporting, the people who have holding American hostages 6 months later after raping and murdering a bunch of babies. That is a failure that Americans will not look kindly on in November.
Well, again, I thank you for that. You touched on it at the beginning, Jeff. I really thank you for coming. But we did in the first episode a whole segment about contrition. And I can't tell you how much you were saying exactly what I've been saying for years, that if it said somewhat believably, a candidate or a sitting president saying they're sorry about something would go a long way. But every political consultant, and they're all bad, tells you never, ever to do that. And that is a huge mistake. Listen, if you don't do it believably, yes, don't do it. But if you really can look the American people in the eye and it's somewhat believable or very believable that you're saying you're sorry about something, I think it would go a long way. I really appreciate your insights. I mean, I find it somewhat consoling that this terrible, this very, very frightening position that the president has taken, that I'm not alone in saying this is not smart electoral politics. I mean, even if he was just being greedy and self-serving and worrying about the polls, he wouldn't do this, let alone doing it for no good reason at all. Jeff, thank you so much. I hope to speak to you again soon. Have a safe trip. Continue to have a great time in Israel and have a safe trip back. And hopefully we'll see each other in person when you get back.
Amen. Thank you, my friend.
All right, coming up next, we're going to be talking to Caroline Downey. She's from the National Review, and we're going to talk a little bit about this as well. But also, Caroline and I are going to talk about what I always say when it comes to Republicans now. By the way, the script has been flipped. It used to be the other way around. But for the last 20 years or so, it feels like the Republicans are bringing knives to a gunfight. And of course, I think one of the biggest examples of that is going on right now this week with the trial of Bob Menendez. Have you heard any Republicans yelling that he should step down from the Senate? Because I haven't. Meanwhile, George Santos, a petty criminal and a grifter, I'm not crying any tears over him. Both parties couldn't wait to show him the door. So thanks for that, and please come back for Caroline Downey. And thanks again, Jeff.
Watch 13 Wham News anywhere on any device with Stir. Download the Stir app and choose Rochester. You get local news and more than 20 other TV channels. And the best part? It's free. Go to your app store and download Stir today.
There's a great scene in West Side Story where the Sharks and the Jets are having a pre-Rumble negotiation. Remember the scene? They're talking about whether they should just have fists, should they have chains, should they have rocks, should they have switchblades? Well, one of the things that I think we don't have is something like that when it comes to politics, because what it seems like we've been dealing with, I think ever since George W. Bush was reelected in 2004, I think that the script got flipped. I think that the Republicans who from, I would say, at least 1980 all the way through 2004 ran tougher, sharper, sometimes even a little underhanded campaigns for president and Congress. Now it's the Democrats, I think, for the last 20 years who have been doing that. And so ostensibly what you kind of have is the Republicans bringing knives to a gunfight. Now, let me tell you what I'm talking about. There's a lot of examples of this. I think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that the Democrats believe that they lost a lot of elections in the 80s because they weren't being mean and tough enough. And they decided to kind of throw a lot of caution to the wind. But we saw a really glaring example of that this week as New Jersey Democrat Senator Bob Menendez started his second trial. This is the second time he's been accused, totally different charges this time, but the same overall accusation that he has taken bribes over the years. Now, I don't want to get into all the minutia of the case, but suffice it to say, the evidence is very, very strong. And there's nobody on either side of the aisle who says otherwise. We're talking about gold bars found in the house. We're talking about cash found in his house. And we're talking about a lot of paper trail between the government of Egypt and the Menendez family, which does seem to be the primary bribery source here. Again, all alleged. But here's the thing. Have you heard any real Republicans going on television, members of Congress, yelling that Bob Menendez should step down, being that this is the second time he's been credibly charged with bribery? Is anyone saying that about Henry Cuellar, a Democrat congressman who, understandably, this is the first time he's been charged with it, but also very, very credible charges against him, also of bribery? Are the Democrats saying that he should step down? No. But just a couple of months ago, we had George Santos, who was a petty grifter, in my opinion. I'm not crying any tears for the man, but he was a Republican from Long Island, and Republicans and Democrats couldn't say that he should step down fast enough. They couldn't get into a microphone fast enough. I'm talking about Republicans here, to say he should step down. What is going on here? Let's bring in my next guest, Caroline Downey. She's with the National Review. Caroline, thank you so much for joining us. What do you think about my guns to the knife fight theory here? Knives to the gunfight theory.
I think it's an excellent analogy and an excellent hypothesis, because I've felt disgruntled with the way Republicans frankly strategize in politics for a long time. And I'm pretty young, so I haven't seen early 1980s, 1970s Republican politicking, but what I have seen in the last few years, and specifically with these ethics cases that you just brought up, is that Republicans love to take this moral high ground when there is an opportunity to root out corruption in their own party and say, look at us, George Santos was a con man and he was such an embarrassment to our party, and so we ousted him from our caucus. Well, okay, congratulations. Now you have a Democrat who replaced him. So your razor thin majority is that much thinner now. So, I mean, that might have backfired a little bit. And you're right that they're not applying that same standard to corruption on the Democrat side, with Menendez, who apparently allegedly likes to hoard gold bars, cash. He was allegedly an agent of the Egyptian government. The only lawmaker in Congress who's actually willing to consistently apply the standard is not even a Republican. It's a Democrat, the one and only John Fetterman, who has had the most shocking 180 I've ever seen. Now he's a favorite, of a lot of kind of contrarians and conservatives. And he said, this Menendez has got to go. This guy is a problem. And I mean, yes, the trial is happening as we speak, but if Santos is an embarrassment, but Menendez is not, what does that say about Republicans' judgment?
Yeah, so, well, let me get to just the brass tacks of it, because I think what you're seeing here, and you've just described it, is sadly, in this case, it's clear that standing up for something decent in your own party isn't really that conducive to your electoral chances. I mean, the Democrats here may be being reprehensible by having a double standard, and the Republicans may be pathetic in that they're not upholding even their political opponents to the same standards they want to uphold. But it seems to work. I mean, honestly, Bob Menendez right now could run against almost any Republican in New Jersey and would certainly be favored, I think, in the early polls. George Santos wouldn't be favored against anyone, I think, if anyone had if he had decided to run again in November. So I think, honestly, this seems to work. But is there something that the Republicans could do now to make it clear that they're not going to stand for this? I mean, are they missing yet another opportunity and saying, hey, we stood up against George Santos, why don't the Democrats stand up against Bob Menendez? What do you think is stopping them from doing that? Because I think that might work.
I just think it's inherent in our political philosophy that we are passive, and we love the chance to prove that we are doing the right thing. But what we're not good at, in my opinion, is aggressively winning. We see this at the macro level too, with the Trump trials and the scandals that President Biden has been accused of, with Hunter Biden and the influence peddling. Obviously Republicans have tried to hold Biden accountable for all that. But I mean, at the end of the day, like, Trump is getting hammered right now with these politically charged prosecutions. And I mean, there's still a lot of Republicans who think that Trump is very tainted by all of this. But I mean, even at National Review, our Andy McCarthy, he's no Trump fan, but he can zoom in and he can scrutinize the cases for what they really are, which is sham prosecutions, especially in this situation of Stormy Daniels, which it's a sham because for so many reasons. Alvin Bragg, what's in the indictment is not actually the narrative that he's presenting. He has no authority to bring a federal campaign finance, charge. Only federal agencies do. I mean, just in every single level, it falls apart under any level of examination. But their goal is to damage Trump's reputation, irreparably. And they're doing a great job of that. The jury is already being misled, I mean, into believing that a crime has been committed when that no such thing has happened. I mean, it's all about portrayal. And by showing a scandal and the salacious details of what Stormy Daniels described on the witness stand, that is enough to cement in the minds of the public that that this is a slimy guy. Like, that's all they're trying to do. They know that, there's no crime. There's no crime. But they're winning. That is just an example at the national level of how Democrats play so dirty. And it influences even moderate Republicans. Moderate Republicans will say, well, Stormy Daniels, it's like, what a scandal. It's like, it was a non-disclosure agreement. That's legal, but Republicans are not willing to play with that kind of fire. And we don't, like, Democrats start fires. They start fights. We are just the late firefighter arriving when the house is already half burned down. Like, that's the Republican tactic.
Well,
Default.
I think, what I think a more fair-minded Democrat would say, that it would be an interesting argument, and I've heard it said, I'm not just making it up. They say, well, you can say that the Democrats are being nasty and stuff and they're being dirty, but Donald Trump fills that chasm for the Republicans. The Republicans may be passive in all the ways that you just said, but with the mean tweets when he was still on Twitter and X, and with the Truth Social stuff and the things he says at his rallies now, he either makes up for it or almost makes up for it. I mean, look, there's definitely a theory out there that establishment Republicans still haven't figured out a way, other than a couple of people like J.D. Vance, who I wouldn't call an establishment Republican, but he's a sitting senator. There are some people who figured out a way to portray themselves as fighters, street fighters, without being as nasty, but there's not a lot of them. And so Trump basically been the reason why he was successful and remains successful within Republican voters is because there's such a weakness among the establishment Republicans. Maybe people would get sick of all the nastiness, but they're not seeing it enough from their old boyfriend, the Mitch McConnells of the world, and everything like that. And so they're getting annoyed. But what would you say to someone who said, like, look, you're right about the members of Congress and stuff, but come on, Trump's so nasty. He's just so nasty. What would you say to them?
I would say, look, I don't love the guy's character record. I don't love the incidents of his past. Like I said, character defects, pretty big ones. But I would also say to that person, I think you've fallen victim to the Democrats, propaganda, because that's what they want you to focus on, predominantly. And what your point just was, I think, very well taken, is that Trump bucks that trend of passivity that is so constant in the Republican Party's history. And that is why it isn't lost on me that maybe the lawfare campaigns are being leveled against him, because he is a threat to the regime, because he does really buck that trend. He is, the fighter of all fighters. And no matter what you throw at him, he seems to have this level of invincibility where it either makes him stronger or, he takes it in stride. I mean, obviously he's been complaining like a baby for a lot of the treatment he's been getting with these cases. But I mean, even in New York, he's forced to be in the courtroom while Biden's out campaigning. It's like, okay, that's, not fair to begin with. The optics of that are terrible. But, Trump obviously is not loving it, but he's maximizing his time in New York by, going to all his blue collar base in the tri-state area. He's going to the construction sites. He's going to the bodegas and the restaurants, and he's doing what he does best, which is riffing with the common man. And he's making the best of it. But yeah, I would say, I think there is an appetite that's growing in the Republican Party, or at least Republican voters, for, politicians with a little bit more tenacity, that don't just, cash their check. Or, I know there's been so much criticism of just how much wealth is accumulated in Congress, the fact that our politicians make as much as they make. My parents, my family, we just think all politicians now are completely corrupt because they just get rich. It's a get rich quick scheme, basically, or, over a couple decades. But I think the congressmen that actually, fight but are tactful about it, they might be getting elected more.
There's something in elections that I like to call the fake because. My dime store psychology degree and my belief in an understanding of the way people vote is that people make the decision about whom they vote for in an instant, almost the same way we decide whom we want to date. Then we kind of, there's a chance to revisit it here and there, but I think for the most part, it's an emotional decision, no matter how well educated and experienced the person is. And we work very hard to find tangible criteria to explain it. So when people say things along the lines of "I love candidate X," you should take that actually as very valuable, much more valuable than when they list off policy, because that's telling you a little bit more honestly why they like a candidate. I think it's bonkers to love a candidate, and when people say it, it freaks me out, but I also don't discount it. So when people said, "I love Barack Obama," I was like, I think it's going to win. When people said in 2016, "Hillary's the most qualified," I was like, she's doomed. I never heard anyone say, I really love Hillary. You know, maybe they said it later. And I kind of knew, ooh, she's in trouble. But
Yeah.
you still need the fake because. You can't just say, so is there something that the Republicans can do now in this atmosphere of knives to the gunfight where you can say, hey, on the one hand, they got tougher. They started to man up a little bit. And on the other hand, you still have the fake because that when you go to the cocktail party or when you have the family get together, you can say, well, look, I know there's problem, but the good reason why I had to vote is blah, 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 when we all know it was probably just a visceral decision. Is there something what's our fake because here, Caroline?
I mean, I think you're right, Jake, to say that Trump evokes these like Machiavellian emotions of either love or like intense love or intense hatred. I've seen the intense love in Florida where, I mean, people here would die for him. It's such a deep red state now, and it is absolutely Trump country in every way. But then the hatred up north that I see, and that, you know, the Northeast is quite intense as well. But I think at the same time, you know, it's a very common observation, I think, in politics that the voters, a lot of them have already made up their minds, like you said, that, you know, that they're going to vote for Trump or they're going to vote for Biden. And then there's this giant group of independents that they obviously determine the outcome of the election. And I think when we look at the polling yesterday, I think it was a Siena College from the New York Times. So 6 swing states, Trump is still ahead in 5 of them. And the issue that is motivating most voters, according to that survey, is still the economy. So, I mean, if you think about the emotion of deep financial insecurity, which despite all the Biden administration's assurances that inflation is tempering, that, you know, the economy is, everything's hunky dory, there's this deep malaise over most of the country. And I think independents aren't buying the gaslighting of Bidenomics that, you know, like, just wait till our funding kicks in, and like nobody's buying it. Like, despite the numbers, like the macroeconomic analytics and you know, the kind of esoteric indices that would suggest that the economy is improving, nobody feels that way. Especially my generation, we feel like everything is out of reach. Everything is unattainable. The American dream is 100% not possible for us. And it's not because we're privileged or spoiled or, you know, we're entitled brats. It's because, you know, we can't afford homes in the town where we had our childhoods, where we grew up. That's not going to happen. You know, it's things like that. It's when you go to the grocery store and it's like $200. You know, it's egregious things like that. So there's like a deep discontent, I think, in the country when it comes to the economy. And second to that is crime and law and order. We saw all these protests breaking out over the country, and we say, okay, that's the Democrats' legacy. That's Biden's legacy, is chaos and anarchy. Same thing with the border. So, you know, I can't really answer the question of like, you know, has this decision already been made for most Americans? I just feel like, you know, independents, there's so many of them in this country, and they do change their mind depending on like what the circumstances are. I think they kind of look at, okay, is my family better off today than it was 4 years ago or during the Trump tenure? And I mean, it's pretty easy answer at this point. Pretty easy answer.
All right, Caroline, thank you so much. Tell us where we can find your work. I know it's in the National Review, but just remind the viewers where they can find the stuff that you're putting out there.
Sure, yeah, National Review. Follow me on Twitter, and we also have a YouTube channel at National Review for policy videos.
All right, Caroline Downey, thanks so much for your analysis. I think you're coming to us from Florida today, is that correct?
Yes.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so we're from Israel, we're from Florida. Later on, we're going to be from Virginia. Caroline Downey, yes, and our next guest is from Virginia, Kerry Dougherty, but from my childhood home of Norfolk, Virginia. She is a radio host at WNIS in Norfolk, Virginia, on a regular daily show. She also was a columnist for many years at the Virginia Virginian pilot, which was my paper as a child. Can't wait to hear what she has to say about debate or not debate. Will we have them? And should Joe Biden do them anyway? That's next.
Ready to up your game and learn more about the thrilling world of sports betting? Introducing Double Down with Breslow, the ultimate podcast about the business of sports gambling. Join me, James Breslow, and a long list of expert guests as we dive into the art and science of the sports betting industry. Evolving regulations, technology enhancements, and the meteoric rise in the number of players makes this sector the fastest growing and most intriguing in the world. Unlock the business secrets from many of the industry's most recognizable C-suite executives, including famous odds makers and influencers. Every episode of Double Down with Breslow is packed with insider tips, deeply skilled analysis, and in-depth discussions. Don't miss out on the ultimate resource for mastering the business of sports betting. Listen to Double Down with Breslow on the Evergreen Podcast Network or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's Double Down with Breslow, the business of sports betting podcast.
Where you get an adult, I'm not saying unbiased because there's no such thing as an unbiased person, but an adult, more in-depth analysis of what works in campaigns, what doesn't work in campaigns, and we offer a lot of unsolicited advice, which is worth what we're charging for it, which is nothing. But anyway, that's the way it goes. My next guest, I'm really excited about because this is like nostalgia for me, all wrapped, but this would be a great guest no matter where she was coming from. This is Kerry Dougherty. She used to be, for a long time, a columnist at the Virginian Pilot. That was the paper of my childhood. I spent my childhood years in Norfolk, Virginia. She also is the co-host of the Kerry and Mike show on WNIS. And if you're listening here in New York, or where I am in New York, I said WNIS, not WINS. But it's a similar type of station. It's talk radio, it's news radio. When I moved from Norfolk to New York and I heard there was WINS, I said to my parents, hey, they have a WNIS here in New York too. And then, of course, that led to a 6-hour lecture from my parents about FCC licensing, and that wasn't worth it. But what can I do? But Kerry is with us now. She also has a website where she writes really insightful stuff. And I listened to her show, not only because I like the Norfolk nostalgia and I'm dying for Virginia news every once in a while, but also because I'd listen to it anywhere. She and Mike are great. Kerry, thanks for joining us.
Oh,
and
thank you, Jake.
Thanks for coming on and talking. So this is a topic that obviously has been kicked around now. Full disclosure, I have been on record for more than a year telling the American people as fairly as I can that there absolutely will not be a Trump-Biden debate in 2024. There won't be. I think it's all being a big tease. So first off, again, no judgments because neither one of us can prove ourselves right quite yet. Where do you stand? Do you think we're going to get one or more than one or any?
How can Biden debate? I mean, I don't see it happening, but he sort of boxed himself in if he doesn't keel over between now and whenever this happens. He told Howard Stern he was ready to debate. He said I think he said, I'd be happy to debate him. And then he also confirmed it last week over the helicopter sounds, I think, didn't he? Somebody shouted on, will you debate? And of course, Trump has said anytime, any place, anywhere. And Trump wants earlier debates because the way they're scheduled now, although nobody's really committed, it would not be until after early voting was underway. Very important to get those done before people have a chance to see Joe Biden in action, I think.
Yeah, well, again, more full disclosure on my part. I think that these debates, as we've had them since at least 1980, are awful. To call them debates is really an insult to debates. I'm a big student and a fan of the great Lincoln Douglas debates of 1858. Those were debates. I mean, no technology. They went on for hours at a time. I think they debated 7 times over the course of a couple of weeks. And by the way, the whole country was better off for it, so much so that when the Civil War started, that Stephen Douglas made a special trip to the White House when he could have been all bitter about it and said, I support you 100%, Mr. President. You need a bigger army to crush these rebels. I mean, I don't think that happens unless they had those debates, but that's another story. So full disclosure, I don't think these are great. These are not great intellectual discourses.
No.
They just yell sound bites at each other. And the stupid bipartisan debate committees don't allow the candidates to actually address each other. So they even if we do have them, let's take them at face value, which is very low. However, this is on a democracy. We have to, any access that we have to unscripted candidates, I think, is a positive. And so we should have them. But you said you agree. Like, how can he debate him with? And I assume that we're talking about his cognitive issues right now. I mean,
Yeah.
even in scripted things, he's not
Yeah.
doing.
No, I mean, and he got through the State of the Union address without collapsing, so it was a big victory. It was seen as a victory. I don't know what they had him on that night. I think it's clear he's medicated part of the time. I really do. I'm not, and I know Trump is eager to debate him because he believes that these will go in his favor. I mean, if I were debating Biden, I would require a drug test. I just require a urine test before you sit down. I really would. I would have said, I'd be happy to give you a sample. How about you, Joe? And I'd make sure he didn't have an earpiece in or something. Let America see see Biden for what he is, because I think he's a mess. I think he's a cognitive mess. But also, he did fairly well back in 2020. I went back and looked at some of those clips yesterday, but that was a different Joe Biden. It doesn't even sound like the same person.
I mean, by the way, for people who have been watching Joe Biden like I have for 40 plus years, I keep forgetting to do what you kind of just alluded to. Forget about looking at him in the early 80s. Look at him just from 4 years ago, from when he didn't campaign much in 2020. Remember, he was in the basement.
Right.
But when he did campaign, when he did do interviews, the difference between him then and now is really, really sharp. It's extremely stark. And I think, so I'm going to say, it sounds like, Kerry Dougherty, if you were the paid consultant for the Biden campaign, you'd say, don't do it. Don't do the debate. Is that, am I guessing correctly?
If I wanted Biden to win, I would be telling him, you can't possibly debate. I think Biden is so out of it that he's a stubborn old geezer. He may insist that he's going to do it. I mean, they seem to control him a good bit. I'm not allowed to do that. They told me I have to stop, but if he commits to it, they're almost going to have to let him debate, which is going to be wonderful. I don't think Trump did all that well back in 2020. Do you remember those? They had the two debates, and he was ranting so much that Biden sort of looked like he was being bullied, and I thought it worked in his favor. And then they canceled the last one because Trump had COVID by then.
Yeah, no, I remember that well, and I agree. I mean, again, that's one of the features of this program. I mean, this is not mindless cheering or denigrating of any candidate.
Right.
I don't think Trump did well in those debates.
No.
I think that in the Trump-Hillary debates, he also wasn't as great as some people thought. He took the bait a number of times. And he was overly pugnacious, but there were some great moments in the debates with Hillary as well. So, I mean, I think you can call that a wash. I think a lot of people just saw that he wasn't a complete meltdown at that point,
Right.
and that helped him. And he didn't have the benefit of that because he was already president in 2020. Kerry, this is something that I've had a little bit of advanced knowledge of, but I can't say for sure they're going to do this. But another reason why I've been steadfast in believing we won't have a debate, beyond the fact that I agree with you, I don't think it'll be a great gamble with Joe Biden to put him up there. But there's another thing going on. Remember that the Democrats absolutely have invested everything in not just saying that Donald Trump is a bad candidate, but saying that basically this is a Nazi. This is someone who should not be platformed. And so even though the regime news media platforms him 24/7, I mean, literally, I was in the gym earlier today when President Biden was giving a live speech about announcing tariffs on China. And I don't really love hearing him speak, but clearly that was the news to go to. And CNN and MSNBC refused to cover it. They had Trump up in a full screen because there's no cameras in the courtroom. They thought it was more important to platform Trump's case. And it's hilarious to me how they'll try to claim this. But absolutely, I see the Biden campaign saying something in the next couple of weeks or months that we would love to debate Donald Trump, but because he says so many hateful things and because he has so many hateful followers, we refuse to give him the platform, as if he doesn't have one anyway. We refuse to give him the platform of a debate stage. And that will be something that the regime news media, they'll carry that water, they'll carry it.
Well, they will. And the thing is, Jake, he's probably banking, or his team, that Trump's going to be convicted in this New York case with that, heavily Democrat jury. And then he can say, well, I'm not going to debate a felon. He's a convicted felon. In court, you don't even have to believe the testimony of a felon. You're allowed to take that into consideration. So I'm not going to debate a felon. I'm sorry. I didn't see this coming. Whoa.
Yeah, no,
So
it's
that
exactly
could be
right.
his out. Yeah.
But it's not only an out, it's literally a campaign message. Now, I think a little bit of a wrench has been thrown into it. I would hope that a wrench has been thrown into fair-minded Americans, because all joking aside, this has been a tough 10 days or so for people like me, because I really think that we have hit, because of what Joe Biden said in his interview with Erin Burnett on CNN last week, I really think this is the low point in American Jewish history. You had an American president repeating an ancient blood libel about Jews killing innocent civilian children and not caring about it. This is, it's the oldest hatred in the world. I've heard it we've all heard it for years. And as bad as the Tree of Life shooting was, remember, that was a lone gunman with no political sponsorship. He didn't like Trump. He didn't like Hillary. He didn't like any of those people. You had the lynching of Leo Frank in the early 20th century, where I'm happy to say the governor of Georgia not only supported Leo Frank and tried to save his life, but sacrificed his political career. He was headed to the Senate. Back then, when the state legislatures used to send people to the Senate, he sacrificed his political career for Leo Frank. So as bad as those incidents were, this is worse.
And also, he's now funding Hamas and Hezbollah by taking those sanctions off of the countries that support Iran. Correct? The countries that are not. So he's not only trying to thwart the Israelis from it going into Rafah, which he cannot do. They're in there now, but he's also he's allowing the enemies to be armed. I think I never thought I would see this in my lifetime. I always assumed Israel is our friend. That's the only democracy in the Middle East. That's it. With the Holocaust wasn't that long ago. I don't like what's happening in America right now. It's horrifying.
No, but and if I were one of Biden's consultants and said to him, like, look, since we're going to use, whether we debate Trump or not, since we're going to use the same excuse you use with Charlottesville being your supposed reason for running, and since we're going to use this narrative that we believe that Trump is basically a borderline Nazi or a Klansman, or at least encourages those people, can you please not say something so anti-Semitic, so that you undermine it? And it's going to be undermined because listen, as bad as what's happened to Israel by this policy, Israel's going to do what it's going to do, as you alluded to. What's not going to happen, what I'm less confident about, is American Jewish communities are now facing anti-Semitic mobs that are very much emboldened by President Biden repeating their false narrative. Right. This is just like the Tsar telling the Cossacks, hey, that whole thing about the blood libel, you're kind of on the right track. I mean, it's the same thing. We've seen it for so long. And that's the problem, because the American Jewish community is not prepared. My community is, because some friends and I started in October a bunch of self-defense and first aid training. But most communities are not prepared. They're not prepared for what's going to happen. And if this president is going to say, I can't run against Donald Trump in the usual way because he's an anti-Semite or he's a bigot, I think he really undermined that narrative. I mean, even some of the people who would like to vote for Joe Biden are going to call him on that. That's a problem.
Well, and I think that these numbers they're throwing around, they're getting them. They'll say from local health authorities in Gaza. That's Hamas. The idea that our government and the legacy media is quoting these crazy numbers of civilian casualties in Gaza, I don't believe any of them. I don't believe any of their numbers. I think it's so sinister that our government is accepting these figures, that they're not getting them from the Red Cross. I don't believe. I think they're getting them straight from Hamas. It's crazy. And if you listen, you brought up Charlottesville, Jake. I keep thinking the stuff they were saying in Charlottesville that made Joe Biden want to run, Jews will not replace us. How different is that from what they're chanting on college campuses now? I mean, it's not different. It's amazing to me that the Unite the Right people, those extreme crazies with their Home Depot tiki torches running through Charlottesville for 2 days, have been echoed now for months on college campuses, and people don't see the similarities. They're saying the same stuff.
This is something we talked about in the first segment of the show with my friend Jeff Ballabon. What really makes this, as someone who's putting together a show about giving people good advice and calling out the bad advice, if you look at every poll for Joe Biden, his problem isn't with the far left, with these radical types. His problem is with the moderate Democrats, the John Fetterman types. And obviously I'm biased, but the numbers are the numbers. And I think that if Joe Biden would come out more in support of Israel, if Joe Biden would publicly say, I now direct Attorney General Merrick Garland to investigate by Title VI the things that are going on campus, and if he said, I now direct him to initiate a RICO investigation of the organizations that are coordinating this, I think his numbers would go up in the polls, don't you?
I do. And I think if you saw that rally that Trump had in Wildwood, New Jersey this past weekend, when he gave them a line about if you come to if you're a student, you're here from another country and you're calling for death to Israel, we're going to deport you. It was thunderous applause. I mean, a lot of us are looking at these foreign students going, why are they still here? Get rid of them. Get rid of them. We're gonna rue the day. We're gonna rue the day we let these kids in here. That's all I can say.
Yeah. We're talking to Kerry Dougherty from WNIS Radio in Norfolk, Virginia, and Virginia Beach area. Kerry, I have something, and I didn't invent this statement, but I really believe in it. I believe in something when it comes to voters called the fake because. I believe that people make their decision about whom they're going to vote for the same way we make a decision about who we want to date. I think it's kind of almost an automatic. I don't care how educated you are. I don't care how much you know all the facts. I think we make a snap decision. And then when we tell someone whom we're voting for, we come up with a phony reason, kind of. You know, the most famous example being, I'm not going to vote for John McCain because of Sarah Palin, which was the fake because. The real reason is he wanted to vote for whatever it was. Right. What's the fake because? Now, listen, I can tell from what you're saying, the stuff that's going on in the Middle East and the stuff that's going on campus really, bothers you. I don't think it would be a fake because for you. But is there a fake because that you would, coming out of this, or is there another fake because you could possibly use for someone who's voting for Trump, especially someone who didn't vote for him the last 2 times?
Well, no. I think it's going to be these campus protests. I think people don't like it. I think the Democrats had a bit of a panic in 2020 with the George Floyd violent festivals that were going on all over the country, and the fact they seemed to endorse that. They had to get that all quashed. I think this is going to run right into the Democratic convention. I'm going to make the popcorn early and watch that. I think they have they have problems. I don't know what the fake because would be, Jake. I just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a lot of things. It's amazing how even if you have a good reason, somebody might say inflation is actually, might be inflation is the real reason for someone, and that's a fine enough reason. But I agree with you. I think that the thing that people will say to avoid getting pushback from someone and not having to get into an economic debate, because no one knows how to do that, is to focus on things like the campus riots, because they're just so ugly. They look bad.
The border.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think you need a fake because to say you're voting for Trump now. I really don't. I think, I'm tired of 11 million. There's 11 million people in my country, and we don't know who they are or why they're here. And you're going to try to say Trump is a racist because he said they're rapists and criminals. They're all criminals if they're in the country. They've committed a crime to get in. That's the way I look at it. It's a matter of how bad of a criminal. But there's 11 million criminals walking around.
Last question, Kerry, because yeah, I know. Last question, Kerry, because I can't overlook where you're coming from. Listen, when I left Norfolk, Virginia in 1981, not only was Norfolk, Virginia Beach very, very deep red, but all of Virginia was very, very deep red. It was a very reliable Republican state. What do you think there's some people who think that maybe Virginia could be in play. I say no, because the federal workers in the north of Virginia will never vote for Donald Trump. And there's so many of them coming out of the woodwork. But I'd love to hear your take on the statewide situation there.
I think that I would put some money into Virginia if I were Trump. I really would. If there is some sort of red wave by the fall, we've got to see how things play out. Youngkin's popularity, his numbers are up around 57% now. And the Democrats have done everything they can do to try to make him look crazy, and he's not. He's a terrific governor. He's the best in my lifetime in Virginia, which coincided when you left. I came in.
Yeah, I know. We were the changing of the guard there.
Actually, I came in 76 to Virginia.
Okay, we were almost a changing of the guard. That's awesome.
Right.
So I appreciate it. Listen, Kerry Dougherty, everyone check out her website. Check out, you don't have to be in Norfolk. You can listen to the WNIS. Just type in Google WNIS Listen Live. I do it all the time. She and Mike are great every morning from 9 to 10. And I thank you so much for joining us. And let us know.
We'd like to have you on too. That'd be great.
Yeah, but I told you no nudity, so you're going to have to take me fully clothed. Really? Sorry.
No, well, we're radio. You can never. We're nude, but nobody can see. So
that sounds good. Kerry Dougherty, thanks so much, and everyone, thank you so much for joining us here on what was the second episode of The Analysts with Jake Novak. We have some great guests lined up for you for the next episode. Remember, this is the place where we don't claim to be unbiased, we don't claim to be nonpartisan, but we claim to be smarter than the average bear. We look at the pros and cons of a candidate, whether we like him or her or not, and we also offer the free advice, which of course is worth what we charge for it. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again in a week.